Convicted by corruption, political prisoners of the Gilded Age. Some crimes are hidden behind prison walls. Some prisoners were never criminals at all. If you want true stories they never taught in school, subscribe now and uncover the truth history tried to lock away. The prison door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Eugene V. Debs stood still as iron bars sealed him away from the world. Outside the walls, soldiers patrolled the streets. Trains burned, workers were beaten, and the man now locked inside this cell had not robbed anyone. He had not killed anyone. His crime was speaking. His crime was leading. His crime was standing in the way of powerful men who controlled money, railroads, and the government itself. As Debs was led down the cold corridor, guards watched him like he was dangerous. Newspapers already called him a threat to the nation. Judges had spoken his guilt before the trial even began. The message was clear. In the Gilded Age, prison was not just for criminals, it was for anyone who challenged power. And this arrest would not end the fight. It would light a fire that no prison wall could contain. But how did a peaceful labor leader become an enemy of the state? And why did the richest men in America want him locked away forever? The story begins years earlier, when the country was shining on the surface, but rotting underneath. The late 1800s were called the Gilded Age because everything looked golden. Cities grew fast, railroads stretched across the land, factories ran day and night. But behind the wealth was suffering. Workers labored for long hours, wages were low, injuries were common, children worked beside adults, and when workers spoke up, they were ignored or crushed. One company stood above the rest, the Pullman Palace Car Company. It built luxury train cars for the wealthy. Its owner, George Pullman, lived in comfort while his workers lived in a company town he controlled. He owned their homes, their stores, even their water. When a national economic crash hit in 1893, Pullman cut wages but did not lower rent. Families starved, children went hungry, workers begged for help. Pullman refused. That was when Eugene V. Debs stepped in. He was the leader of the American Railway Union. He believed workers deserved respect. He believed in fairness. And most of all, he believed that workers standing together could not be ignored. When Pullman workers went on strike, Debs supported them. Rail workers across the nation refused to move trains with Pullman cars. The country began to slow down. The rich began to panic. Railroad owners called the strike a danger to America. Newspapers owned by wealthy men spread fear. They said Debs was leading a rebellion. They said the nation was under attack. Behind closed doors, railroad leaders met with politicians. They demanded action, and the government listened. Federal troops were sent into Chicago, not to protect workers, but to break the strike. Soldiers clashed with crowds. Violence erupted. Fires burned. The nation watched as the government chose sides, and it did not choose the workers. Then came the order. Eugene V. Debs was arrested, not for violence, not for destruction, but for interfering with the mail, a charge used as a weapon. The trial was fast. The judge showed no sympathy. The jury was pressured. The outcome was decided before Debs spoke a word. When the sentence was read, Debs did not shout. He did not beg. He stood tall. He knew this was bigger than him. His prison cell became a symbol, a warning. Step out of line, and this will be your fate. Inside prison, Debs read. He thought. He watched how guards treated other inmates. Many were there for stealing bread, for breaking rules made by rich men. He saw the system clearly now. Prison was not about justice, it was about control. Outside the walls, the strike collapsed. Workers returned to their jobs, beaten and broken. The companies won. The government declared order restored. But something had changed. People began to ask questions. If a peaceful leader could be jailed, who was truly safe? As Debs sat alone in his cell, a thought formed in his mind. This prison sentence was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous to those in power. And when he finally walked free, America would soon realize they had not silenced a man. They had created a voice that prison could not kill. But the price of that awakening would be higher than anyone expected. The prison gates opened, but freedom did not rush in. When Eugene V. Debs stepped back into the daylight, crowds waited. Some cheered his name, others watched with fear. Newspapers warned that he was more dangerous now than before. Powerful men whispered that prison had failed to break him. They were right. Debs did not walk away quietly. He walked out changed.
Inside his cell, he had seen the truth clearly. Prison was not just a place for thieves and killers. It was a weapon, a clean, legal-looking weapon used to crush people who stood in the way of money and power. And Debs was not the only one who learned this lesson the hard way. Across America, other protest leaders were being hunted. In Pennsylvania, coal miners were dragged from their homes. In Illinois, factory organizers vanished into jails. In New York, speakers were arrested the moment they climbed onto boxes in public squares. The charges were always neat and simple: conspiracy, obstruction, disorderly conduct, interfering with business. Words that sounded harmless but carried iron bars behind them. One group felt this more than most: the labor activists known as the Molly Maguires. They were Irish immigrant coal miners who worked in deadly conditions. Cave-ins were common, explosions killed without warning, pay was low. Company guards ruled the towns. When miners tried to organize, violence followed, not just from miners, but from the companies themselves. Then the arrests began. Men were seized late at night, trials were rushed, evidence came from paid informants. Judges had close ties to mine owners. Juries were packed with men who feared losing their jobs. One by one, the accused were convicted. Some were sent to prison, others were executed. To the public, they were painted as terrorists. To their families, they were fathers who never came home. Debs watched all of this closely. He spoke about it openly. He warned that the law was being bent to serve wealth, and every speech made him more dangerous in the eyes of the state. By the late 1990s, America was nervous. Strikes spread fast. Workers talked about unions. Politicians feared unrest. Business leaders feared loss. The answer was always the same: arrest the leaders, break the movement, use prisons to scare the rest into silence. Jails filled with men who had not committed real crimes. Their only mistake was standing at the front of a crowd. Some prisoners broke quickly. They signed papers promising never to organize again. Others were beaten down by long sentences and hard labor, but a few grew stronger in the dark. Debs became one of them. He traveled across the country, speaking to workers, farmers, and immigrants. He told them what he had seen behind bars. He told them prisons were not neutral. They were built by laws written for the powerful. His words spread faster than railroads ever could. The government noticed. Police followed him from town to town. Permits were denied. Meetings were shut down. Newspapers mocked him. Judges warned him. Still, he spoke. Then came the moment the state had been waiting for. In a packed hall, Debs stood before a crowd and spoke about political prisoners. He named names. He described trials fixed before they began. He accused courts of serving wealth, not justice. Gasps filled the room. Officers shifted nervously near the doors. By the end of the speech, they had their excuse. Once again, Debs was arrested. This time, the tone was colder. The charge list longer, the message clearer. The law would not allow this kind of voice to grow unchecked.
The courtroom felt less like a place of fairness and more like a stage. The outcome was expected. The sentence was heavy. As Debs was taken away, he raised his hand to the crowd, not in fear, not in anger, but in promise. Behind him, the prison swallowed another political prisoner. Inside, conditions were harsh. Guards treated labor leaders with special cruelty. They were isolated, watched closely. Letters were delayed or lost. Visits were limited. The goal was not just punishment, it was erasure. But prisons have a strange effect. When bodies are locked away, ideas sometimes grow louder. Other inmates listened to Debs speak quietly through bars. He talked about fairness, about dignity, about a future where prison would no longer be used to silence truth. Guards tried to stop him. They failed. Outside the walls, the country continued to crack. More strikes, more arrests, more cells filled with men who had dared to resist. And then, something unexpected happened. People began to notice a pattern. Journalists asked questions. Families spoke out. Churches protested. Even some politicians grew uneasy. The same names kept appearing, the same charges, the same wealthy interests behind every arrest. The phrase political prisoner began to spread. It scared those in power. If the public believed prisons were being used as tools of control, the entire system could be questioned, and that could not be allowed. Plans were made quietly. Laws were tightened. Surveillance increased. The net grew wider. Anyone could be next. Inside his cell, Debs sensed it. This fight was reaching a breaking point. Either the system would crush the movement completely, or the truth would break through the walls. One night, a guard stopped at his cell longer than usual. He whispered a warning. New charges were coming, harsher laws, longer sentences. The next wave would be worse. Debs sat on his bunk staring at the floor. He knew what was coming.
The prison was no longer just a cage, it was a battlefield. And the next move would decide whether political prisoners would remain hidden in silence or step into history where the whole nation could see them. The cell was quiet, but the country outside was not. By the time Eugene V. Debs faced his final and most dangerous fight, America was boiling. Strikes shut down cities, factories stood still, railroad lines went silent. The same pattern kept repeating. Workers spoke, power answered with prisons. This time, the government did not hide its fear. Debs was no longer just a labor leader, he was now a symbol. To millions of working people, he represented hope. To politicians and industrial giants, he represented chaos. And chaos, they believed, had to be locked away. The arrest came fast. Debs was charged again, accused of encouraging unrest and challenging the authority of the state. The courtroom felt colder than ever. Guards lined the walls. Reporters filled every seat. The judge barely looked at him. Everyone already knew the ending. When Debs was found guilty, the sentence was harsh. It was meant to break him. It was meant to warn everyone watching. As he was led away, Debs turned to the crowd and spoke calmly. He said that while there was a lower class, he was in it. While there was a criminal element, he was of it. And while there was a soul in prison, he was not free. Those words traveled farther than any speech he had ever given. Inside prison, the pressure was relentless. Debs was watched day and night. Guards tried to isolate him. Letters were censored. Supporters were turned away. The system wanted silence. But silence never came. Across the country, people began to question everything. Why were peaceful leaders in prison while corrupt officials walked free? Why did the law move so fast against workers, but so slowly against wealth? Why did prison doors only slam shut for one side? Other political prisoners shared Debs' fate. In mining towns, union leaders were locked up without fair trials. In cities,
protest speakers were arrested before they finished a sentence. Some were beaten, some disappeared into long sentences. Families waited outside prison walls, unsure if their loved ones would ever return. The prisons were full, but so were the streets. Public opinion began to shift. Newspapers that once attacked labor leaders now questioned the courts. Churches spoke about injustice. Workers marched peacefully. The idea that prisons were being used to protect power, not truth, could no longer be ignored. Even politicians felt the pressure. Debs ran for president while still behind bars. It sounded impossible. A prisoner running for the highest office in the land, but millions voted for him. Not because they thought he would win, but because they wanted to be heard. That vote sent a message stronger than any riot. You can jail a man, you cannot jail an idea. The government released Debs, but the damage was done. The public had seen too much. The Gilded Age mask had cracked. Behind the gold was fear. Behind the law was control. Behind prison walls were voices that refused to disappear. Slowly, reforms followed. Not enough, not fast enough, but the conversation had changed. Solitary confinement was questioned. Labor laws improved. Political arrests became harder to justify. Still, many prisoners never saw freedom. Some died inside cells. Some were forgotten by history, their names erased, their stories buried, but their impact remained. The prisons of the Gilded Age taught America a hard lesson. Justice can be bent, law can be used as a weapon, and when power feels threatened, it does not argue, it locks the door. Today, those prison walls still stand in memory. They remind us that freedom is not lost all at once. It is taken quietly, one arrest, one sentence, one cell at a time. Debs lived long enough to see change begin, but he never forgot the men left behind, the true political prisoners, the ones convicted not by crime, but by corruption. And the question he left behind still echoes.
If prisons once silenced truth, how many truths are still locked away today? The cell doors no longer slammed for Eugene V. Debs, but the echo of iron never left him. Years after his release, long after the guards and courts had moved on, Debs still heard that sound. It reminded him that the prison system had not changed as much as people believed. The faces inside the cells were different now, but the reason many were there felt the same. Across America, labor leaders watched carefully. They knew what happened to Debs could happen to them. The lesson of the Gilded Age was clear. If you threatened powerful interests, the law could be shaped against you. Courts could move fast, juries could be guided, prison could be waiting. And it was not just labor leaders. Writers were arrested for their words. Protesters were jailed for standing still. Immigrants were locked up for their beliefs. The label criminal was easy to apply when fear ruled the country. Once that label stuck, prison did the rest of the work. Behind prison walls, political prisoners shared the same quiet suffering. Long days, hard labor, letters delayed or destroyed, families kept outside. Many were told they would only see freedom if they agreed to stop speaking. Some did, some could not. Those who refused paid the price. Yet something unexpected happened inside those prisons. Men talked through walls. They shared stories. They realized they were not alone. One by one, they understood they were not criminals. They were examples. Outside, the public could no longer look away. Workers remembered the strikes. Families remembered the arrests. Churches remembered the sermons that warned of injustice. Slowly, the word corruption stopped being whispered and started being spoken out loud. People asked dangerous questions. Why were protest leaders jailed while company owners walked free? Why did judges dine with industrialists?
Why did prisons fill during strikes but empty when workers were crushed? These questions made those in power uncomfortable. Laws began to shift, not out of kindness, but out of pressure. Some protections for workers were added. Courts became more careful. Arrests still happened, but they required more explanation. The system learned to hide its control better. Debs watched this change with mixed feelings. He knew progress had been made, but he also knew how fragile it was. He warned again and again that freedom does not disappear in one moment. It fades when people stop paying attention. Many political prisoners were never remembered. Their names were not printed in books. Their faces were not carved into stone. But they shaped the future quietly through sacrifice. The prisons of the Gilded Age left scars on America. They proved that justice can be bent when money speaks louder than truth. They proved that prison can be used not to protect society, but to protect power. And they left behind a warning. Every generation believes it is past these mistakes. Every generation thinks corruption belongs to history. But the walls built in the 1800s were not just made of stone. They were built from fear, silence, and obedience. Those materials still exist. Today, the question remains the same as it was then. When the law arrests a voice instead of a crime, is it justice or control? When prisons grow during unrest, who are they really meant to serve? And how many people are locked away, not because they broke the law, but because they challenged it? The Gilded Age ended, but its prisons taught a lesson America still struggles to learn. Convicted by corruption is not just a story of the past, it is a warning that still waits behind locked doors. The warning came too late for many of them. By the time America began to understand what the Gilded Age prisons had really been used for, thousands of lives had already been crushed inside, cells meant to erase resistance. The system did not announce its guilt. It moved quietly, legally, and with papers stamped by courts. And then came the moment that exposed everything. In the early years of the new century, secret reports leaked from inside state prisons. Former guards spoke, clerks talked, journalists uncovered records showing patterns that could no longer be denied. The same judges, the same prosecutors, the same wealthy companies pushing for arrests whenever workers organized. It was no longer rumor, it was proof. Men had been convicted without real evidence. Trials had been rushed. Witnesses had been paid. Prison sentences had been handed down not to protect the public, but to protect profits. The law had worn a mask, and now it was slipping. Families of political prisoners came forward. Mothers held faded letters written from cells. Wives spoke of visits cut short. Children described growing up without fathers who were still alive, just locked away. Their pain finally had a voice, but the system fought back. Officials denied everything. They said the arrests were legal. They said the prisoners were dangerous. They said unrest had to be controlled. Fear was their shield, and fear still worked on many people. Inside prisons, the pressure grew worse. Political prisoners were separated from others. Some were transferred without warning. Some vanished into distant facilities where visits were nearly impossible. Isolation returned as punishment. Silence was forced again. Yet the idea could not be locked up.
Workers remembered Debs. They remembered the strikes. They remembered how prisons had been used like chains. And they taught the next generation, quietly, carefully, one story at a time. By now, the country had changed on the surface. New laws existed, new leaders spoke about fairness. But deep inside, the old system still waited. It had learned to be patient. Debs, older and tired, gave one of his final speeches. His voice was softer, but his words were sharper than ever.
He warned that corruption does not disappear. It adapts. It finds new names, new excuses, new prisons. Soon after, he faded from public life, but the prisons did not. Years later, during new moments of unrest, the same methods appeared. Arrest the leaders, isolate them, control the story, call it law and order. The pattern repeated, just quieter, cleaner, harder to see. Historians would later look back and draw a straight line from the Gilded Age to the present. They would say the prisons taught the government something dangerous, that locking away voices was easier than answering them. And they would ask the same question Debs once asked from behind bars. If justice can be shaped by power, who decides who belongs in a cell? The answer was never comforting. The political prisoners of the Gilded Age were not perfect men, but they were not criminals. They were warnings, living proof of what happens when fear replaces fairness. Their cells may be empty now, but the lesson remains, because every time power feels threatened, the door is still there, and it still knows how to close. The last cell was empty, but the damage remained. Long after the Gilded Age faded into history books, the shadow of its prisons still stretched across America. The iron bars had rusted, the guards were gone, the prisoners were buried, yet the system they revealed never truly disappeared. People like Eugene V. Debs were no longer called criminals. History corrected that lie. He was remembered as a man who stood up when standing up was dangerous, a man who went to prison not for violence, but for truth. But for every Debs whose name survived, there were thousands who vanished into silence. Men who led strikes and never returned home. Women who spoke in public and were jailed until their voices broke. Immigrants who were labeled threats simply for believing in fairness. Their stories were not carved into monuments. They lived only in court papers, prison logs, and fading memories. As the years passed, America told itself the lesson had been learned. New laws promised rights. Courts claimed neutrality. Prisons said they were about safety, not control. The language changed. The buildings improved. The chains became invisible. But the pattern remained. Whenever fear rose, prisons filled. Whenever power felt challenged, arrests followed. Whenever voices grew too loud, silence was enforced. The Gilded Age had proven something uncomfortable. Justice could be shaped, law could be bent, and prisons could be used not to protect society, but to protect those already on top. That truth was hard to face. It meant admitting that corruption did not live only in dark alleys. It sat in offices, it wore suits, it signed papers, it spoke calmly while lives were taken away behind locked doors. Debs once said that freedom cannot exist while even one soul is unjustly imprisoned. That belief outlived him. It passed from worker to worker, from cell to cell, from generation to generation, and it still matters. Because political prisoners are not always called that. Sometimes they are called agitators, sometimes troublemakers, sometimes threats. The name changes, but the cage stays the same. The prisons of the Gilded Age did more than punish people. They revealed a truth about power, that when words become dangerous, power does not debate, it arrests. Today, the iron doors may look different, but the question they raise has never been answered. Who decides when protest becomes a crime? Who decides whose voice is too dangerous to hear? And how many people are still convicted, not by evidence, but by corruption? The past does not warn loudly, it whispers, and those prison walls are still whispering. They are asking if we are listening this time. If this story made you question justice, you're not alone. More hidden prison stories are coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss the voices history tried to silence. The next truth is closer than you think.